I used to think love was sacrifice. That giving up a career, a courtroom, a name on a door, was what women did when they believed in someone else's dream. I believed in Jason. He was magnetic, sharp jaw, sharper tongue, a billionaire in the making with the kind of confidence that could convince the sky to turn red. And I was the girl with law journals under one arm and him under the other. We looked perfect. Until I started to fade. By the time I was 5 months pregnant, I realized he hadn't asked me a single question about myself in weeks. Not about the baby. Not about the cramps I'd been hiding, not even about the articles I once loved to read aloud before bed. He'd stop making eye contact when I spoke. He'd reply to my concerns with jokes or silence, and I kept telling myself, he's stressed. He's busy. He'll come back to me when the product launches. But he didn't come back. He built a stage for himself, and I became part of the furniture, silent, supportive, disposable. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and spread the word, and tell us where you're watching from. That night, the dinner was supposed to be a celebration. His startup had just secured a $40 million round. Investors, media consultants, celebrity advisors, they all came dressed in black tie confidence. I wore navy silk that barely fit, my swollen ankles stuffed into heels too narrow. I plastered on a smile because that's what the wife of a genius does. She beams, even if she's bleeding inside. The steak was rare, the laughter was loud, and I tried to keep up with conversations I used to dominate. Until Jason stood clinking his wine glass. I turned toward him instinctively, expecting gratitude. Maybe a kind word. Maybe something small that reminded me he still saw me. He raised his glass toward me and said, "To the woman who gave up her brain to give me a baby." There was a pause. Just a beat before the room erupted in laughter. Investors chuckled. His assistant covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Wow, he actually said that." And I smiled, because I'd learned that not smiling would only make things worse, but inside something cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like a hairline fracture in glass that eventually becomes a shatter. I swallowed the metallic taste of shame and lowered my eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I excused myself and walked to the ladies' room. One hand on my belly, the other clenched so hard my nails left half-moons in my palm. In the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. My eyes were dull. My lips trembled from holding back everything I wanted to scream. I turned on the faucet just to have a sound that wasn't laughter. That was the moment I stopped making excuses for him. And by the time I returned to the table, still silent, Jason was already laughing with someone else. The joke had moved on, but I hadn't. The night after the dinner, Jason came home late, his tie askew, his eyes glassy with celebration. I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. He didn't bother with a good night. Just tossed his phone onto the dresser and collapsed onto the far edge of the mattress like we were strangers sharing a hotel room. I lay still, counting the seconds between his breaths, pretending they didn't sound like guilt. The next morning, I moved through the house like I was made of fog. Light filtered through the curtains, bouncing off the brushed steel of the ensuite bathroom. Jason was already inside, door shut, water running. I was brushing my teeth in the hallway mirror when I heard it. His voice, muffled, low, casual. "Yeah, babe. Now she's just being hormonal again. You know how it is. Tears over nothing. It's getting exhausting, honestly." A pause. Then laughter. Not the forced kind he gave me when I asked about the baby kicking. Not the public kind he used at dinners to impress. This was different. Intimate. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth. My first instinct wasn't rage. It was denial. Maybe he was joking with a colleague. Maybe he was venting. Maybe it wasn't what it sounded like, but I knew his tone. That softness, that edge of playfulness, that particular drop in pitch he used when he wanted something. I stepped closer to the bathroom door. The lock clicked from inside. My pulse spiked. Can't wait to get out of here for a bit. She's constantly watching me. I feel like I'm in a padded cell. Another chuckle. Then silence. Then a whisper so low I almost missed it. "Yeah, I wish it was your baby instead." My body went cold. I backed away, toothbrush falling into the hallway carpet. Forgotten. I didn't confront him when he stepped out 10 minutes later. Towel slung low, grinning like nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek absently, muttered something about needing to prep for a board call, and disappeared into his office. I stared at the shut bathroom door, heart hammering. Instead of crying, I picked up his phone. It was locked, of course. But I knew the pattern. His ego was predictable. The same L-shaped swipe he used since college. It opened on the first try. I didn't scroll. I didn't panic. I just went to the call log. The number wasn't saved, but it was recent. The last outgoing call. No name, just digits. I picked up my journal, an old leather one I hadn't touched in months. Its first page was filled with baby name ideas. Now I turned to a fresh page and wrote the number down with a shaking hand. I added the time, the date, and the word, babe. Then I placed the journal beneath a stack of pregnancy books on the nightstand. That day, something shifted. I started listening more carefully, not just to what Jason said, but to what he avoided, what he deleted, what he didn't say when I asked simple questions. I stopped believing in accidents. Every detail became evidence. Every word a breadcrumb. He thought I was too tired to notice, too emotional, too pregnant. But I wasn't unraveling. I was documenting, and I knew it wouldn't stop with a phone call. It started as another quiet morning, one of many where I moved around the house unnoticed. Jason had left early. Something about a breakfast meeting with product guys, though he didn't mention names. He never did anymore. His schedule had become a fortress I wasn't allowed near. After I finished folding the last of the baby's onesies, I walked into his office to drop off the stack of mail the housekeeper had left by the door. That's when I saw the folder, thick, gray, sealed with a band and a golden clip, resting at the corner of his desk like it had been forgotten in a rush. I didn't go looking for it, I swear I didn't. But my hand moved before I could reason myself out of it. The folder was marked, Employee Termination, A. Rivera. I flipped it open slowly, expecting HR jargon, maybe some clause about performance or company policy, but what I found wasn't a termination letter. It was an NDA, 4 pages long, dated 6 months ago. The name at the bottom wasn't A. Rivera, it was Angela Rivera, Jason's executive assistant. I remembered her vaguely, sharp, polite, always wearing red lipstick and low heels. She had disappeared one day, no notice, no explanation. Jason claimed she'd left to pursue freelance work. I read the NDA twice, then a third time. Clause 3.2 caught my breath in my throat. Recipient agrees to permanently waive any claims or statements, public or private, suggesting that Mr. Grant is the biological father of her dependent minor, born in June of this year. My vision blurred. I blinked hard. Jason had a child, another child, born in June. That was after our 3rd wedding anniversary, after we'd started IVF, after he'd kissed my forehead and whispered, "We're finally going to be a family." I sat down, the folder trembling in my lap. The words twisted like glass under my skin. This wasn't just infidelity. This was architecture, a web he'd built, hidden beneath board meetings and backhanded toasts. He hadn't betrayed me in a moment of weakness. He'd designed the betrayal. And Angela. She had vanished because she got pregnant. And because she signed her silence away, I should have screamed, should have thrown something, broken something. But there was no satisfaction in rage. Only a cold, rising clarity. I took my phone and snapped pictures of every page, every signature, every clause. I filed the photos in a hidden folder named after a fake doctor's appointment. I returned the folder exactly where it was. I didn't confront him. Not yet. He still thought I was clueless. Still thought I was soft enough to take it. That night, as he stood behind me brushing his teeth, I caught his reflection in the mirror, smug, distracted, humming some tune he probably used to flirt. I smiled back like nothing had changed, because he wasn't going to see it coming. But I was, and I had just started collecting the truth. What I didn't know yet was how close his mother already was. The first time I met Evelyn Grant, she wore pearls so tight they looked like a chokehold. Her smile never reached her eyes, and when she leaned in to hug me, it felt like an inspection, not affection. That was 3 years ago at our engagement dinner. She said, "You're lovely, but Jason's focus is his company now, not distractions." I laughed then. I didn't understand she meant me. Now, 7 months into my pregnancy, she showed up unannounced with white orchids and a bottle of rosé I couldn't drink. Jason welcomed her like royalty. I stayed seated on the couch, legs swollen, back aching, wondering why she was here. "It's just a short visit," she said. placing the bottle deliberately next to the prenatal vitamins I'd left on the counter. Her eyes flicked down to my belly, then up to my face with surgical precision. We sat in the living room while Jason took a call in the other room. She crossed her legs, tugged her cashmere sleeve, and smiled with the practiced ease of a woman who'd hosted more charity galas than birthday parties. I waited, hands folded on my stomach, silence heavy between us. Finally, she said, "You're glowing, dear." But I must admit, pregnancy does tend to exaggerate certain features. It's harder to tell who a baby might resemble. My breath caught sharp and low, she smirked. Jason always had such strong genes. You know, dominant traits, high cheekbones, narrow nose, that sort of thing. I didn't respond. "You're sure it's his, yes?" She said it softly, like a confession. "You know how these things can get fuzzy. Hormones, moods, the pressure." I felt heat rise up my spine, settling behind my eyes. "I've never cheated on your son," I said quietly, though it sounded louder in the room than I intended. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "Of course. I didn't mean to imply. But you know, these things are hard to prove. Men in Jason's position, they can't afford uncertainty." I should have thrown her out. I should have screamed. But I just stared at the orchids. Jason re-entered moments later, kissed her on the cheek, and asked what we were chatting about. "Oh, nothing," she purred. "Just baby things." That night I curled around my belly in bed while Jason snored beside me. I wanted to believe this was just her trying to rattle me, but her words wouldn't leave. And then the cramps started. Subtle at first, then sharp. I slid out of bed, gripping the dresser to stay upright. Pain bloomed deep and fast. I whispered his name once. No response. Again, nothing. I drove myself to the hospital. They checked me in, hooked me to machines. The baby was okay, but my blood pressure wasn't. The doctor asked if I'd been under stress. I laughed. It came out broken. By dawn, I was home again. Jason didn't ask where I'd gone. Just complained that I wasn't there to make coffee. Evelyn's words echoed behind every beat of my pulse. She wanted me gone. And Jason, I realized, wasn't stopping her. It was after another dinner Jason skipped. I'd made herb-roasted chicken, the kind he used to love when we were dating. I sat at the table alone, candles flickering, staring at his empty chair until the food turned cold. When he finally walked in, close to midnight, he reeked of whiskey and faint perfume. Not mine. He dropped his keys on the console like a man dropping a burden and glanced at the untouched dinner. "Don't wait up next time," he muttered, loosening his tie. I stood, silent at first, heart pounding. "Where were you?" He laughed. "Don't start." "Jason," I said, barely recognizing my own voice. "You missed another ultrasound. You said you'd be there. You said you wanted this child." He turned to me slowly, like I was a fly buzzing too close. I said a lot of things. I stepped closer. "I saw the NDA, Angela Rivera. The baby born in June. You had another child, after we were married." His smile vanished. "I've been quiet. I've been patient. I've documented everything," I continued, pulse hammering. "And now your mother. She's questioning if this baby is even yours." "She's right to question," he snapped. I blinked. "She's protecting my legacy." You're just noise." He stepped closer, voice low, cutting. "You think your little notes matter? You think carrying this baby gives you power? You're not a partner. You're an incubator, a womb." That's it, I felt it. Not just in my chest, but low, sudden, sharp. I doubled over. "Layla?" He said, startled. I couldn't speak. My breath came in gasps. The room tilted. Blood soaked through my leggings before I could take a step. He rushed forward, but I slapped his hand away. "Don't touch me," I gasped, voice trembling. "Don't even pretend." The ride to the hospital was a blur of headlights and contractions. The pain was primal, ancient. The fear was worse. They took me in immediately, hooked wires to my belly, checked vitals. I stared at the ceiling, gripping the sheet so tightly my knuckles whitened. "The baby's okay," the nurse finally said, soft but firm. "But you need to rest. Your body's under extreme pressure." A doctor came in, kind eyes full of careful questions. "Have you been under emotional distress, Mrs. Grant?" I stared at him, then laughed. Quietly, hysterically. "I think I've been under siege," I whispered. Jason was outside, pacing like he was the victim. I turned my face to the wall. I didn't want him to touch my child again. Later, alone in the hospital bed, I looked down at my belly, still rising and falling, and whispered, "You're safe." I won't let him win. When Jason returned to the room, I pretended to be asleep, because I wasn't ready to confront him yet. But the fracture had spread, and by morning, I'd make my first call to his board. It happened 3 weeks early. A sudden gush while I was sorting laundry. No warning, no pain at first, just silence, then the slow rising tremor of panic. I called out for Jason, even though I knew he wasn't home. He'd left for a private strategy retreat that morning. No details. No location. Just a suitcase, a nod, and the door slamming behind him. I called a cab. The hospital lights felt too bright, the smell too clean. My body moved on instinct while my mind floated elsewhere, somewhere quieter, colder. I kept checking my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Just an empty screen that confirmed what I already knew. He wasn't coming. 12 hours of labor, screaming into pillows. Nurses holding my hand when I reached out for a man who had already left me in every way that mattered. And then, she arrived. My daughter. Tiny. Wrinkled. Loud. A wail that tore through the sterile silence like a war cry. I held her close and wept, not because I was afraid, but because in that moment, for the first time in months, I felt real, whole. Like I still had something pure to protect. The nurse asked if I wanted to call the father. "No," I said softly. "He doesn't get this moment." She looked surprised but didn't press. Later, when they wheeled my daughter to the nursery, I opened my purse and pulled out the envelope. The one I'd tucked away weeks ago. Inside a legal form. A private lab's DNA kit. I'd already swabbed myself the night before. The nurse helped me swab my baby gently, carefully. I sealed the samples and handed them over to the courier without flinching. Jason didn't know. But I had prepared for this. I had the NDA, the call logs, the photographs of the signed agreement, audio recordings, the printed quote from him, "You're not a partner. You're a womb." I even had Evelyn's voice, sharp and cold from a dinner party recording. "Are we even sure it's Jason's?" I kept it all, not for revenge, for insurance, in case he ever dared try to strip her identity the way he'd tried to strip mine. By morning, there were still no texts, no congratulations, no name suggestions, nothing, just an empty inbox and a baby sleeping beside me. The nurse brought coffee and smiled. "She looks like you," I smiled back. "She does, but I saw him too. In the jawline, the tilt of her chin, the stubborn arch of her brows, and that's when I knew what I had to do next. Jason had erased me from his life, but I was going to write myself back in, on my terms. 1 month passed, just enough time for the bruises on my body to fade and the ones on my spirit to sharpen into resolve. I wasn't grieving anymore. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. Jason still hadn't met his daughter. He didn't ask for photos, didn't check the hospital records, didn't even send flowers. But that was fine, better even. It meant he still believed I was powerless. That belief would be his blind spot, and I planned to use it. I sat on the couch, my daughter asleep against my chest, as I opened my laptop. The folder on my desktop was labeled Kitchen Remodel Quotes, but inside were 36 files, audio clips, documents, call recordings, scanned NDAs, and one neatly labeled PDF, DNA results confirmed. I composed the email carefully. To boardograntfuturetech.com, Miss Subject, a matter requiring urgent board attention. Confidential. I didn't threaten. I didn't accuse. I simply offered a preview. A legal document suggesting impropriety involving company leadership, signed NDAs suggesting hush payments, and recorded audio that could pose a reputational risk. I didn't name Jason directly, but I didn't need to. Within 2 days, I received a response. One of the directors, Amara Vance, an independent shareholder with a reputation for integrity, asked to speak with me privately. We met at a small cafe. Neutral ground. I arrived early, baby monitor in my purse, wearing the same blazer I used to argue court motions in. Amara listened, eyes sharp, fingers steepled as I laid it out. Jason's affair with an employee. The paternity cover-up. The NDA, his verbal abuse, the digital evidence, the pattern of manipulation, the silence. When I finished, she didn't speak right away, just exhaled slowly. You're not the first woman to tell me Jason's dangerous when he's in control, she said finally. But you're the first who's brought receipts. I handed her a flash drive. She nodded. The next quarterly review is in 6 days. You should be there. I didn't get an invite. You will. 3 days later, Jason's mother intercepted the invitation, digitally rerouted the calendar notice from his assistant to trash. She thought she could block it, but Amara forwarded me the access link directly. I didn't reply. I just clicked accept. Jason had no idea I was coming. He was too busy posting about vision and family legacy on LinkedIn. The morning of the meeting, I laid out my outfit like armor, a tailored black sheath dress, heels I hadn't worn since court, and a baby blue binder with every printed document in triplicate. I kissed my daughter's forehead before the nanny arrived. You're going to change everything, I whispered. As I stepped into the elevator of Grant Future Tech headquarters, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, not grief, not rage, purpose. And when those elevator doors opened, Jason's empire was going to meet its reckoning from the woman he thought he'd erased. The elevator doors slid open with a quiet chime, but the sound was louder than a gunshot in my ears. I stepped onto the polished marble floor of the Grant Future Tech executive level, with my daughter in my arms and the folder pressed tight against my side. Heads turned. Conversations paused. The clink of coffee cups and heels halted mid-motion. Silence rushed in like a tide. I walked slowly, deliberately, each step echoing. I wore black, sleek, sharp, unmissable. The same color they wore to power meetings. Only I wasn't here to pitch. I was here to end things. Jason stood at the head of the boardroom table, gesturing in that overconfident way I used to find charming. He hadn't seen me yet. He was mid-sentence, spinning something about vertical integration and global scalability, and then he saw me. His mouth hung open for just a second too long. Then came the smirk. The mask. Security, he chuckled, gesturing vaguely. Pretty sure this isn't a daycare. A few board members exchanged glances. No one moved. I stepped closer, placed the baby carrier gently on the floor beside my chair. His chair, the one he'd always insisted no one else touch, and unzipped the binder. Jason, I said clearly, calmly, your son wants to watch you lose everything. The room froze. He stared at me, smile slipping. What the hell are you doing? I pulled out the first document, Angela Rivera's NDA. Printed, highlighted, signed. Then the internal email chain between him and Evelyn discussing a containment strategy. And then finally, the DNA test. I slid it down the table. Jason didn't reach for it, but Amara did. She read the results silently, then looked up. This confirms paternity? Yes, I said. 2 children. 2 women. 1 cover-up. Jason laughed again, but it was tighter now, forced. This is ridiculous. She's bitter. She's emotional. This isn't illegal. Save it, Amara said, sharp as glass. He looked at her like she'd just betrayed him. I've got emails, voicemails, financial transfers masked as consulting fees for Angela. Want me to keep going? I asked. He glanced toward the hallway. No security came. No rescue. I leaned down, unstrapped the baby, and lifted her gently. She's yours, Jason. You've ignored her. Denied her. But now, I looked around the room, you're going to explain to your board why that child exists, and why your mother paid to keep her hidden. A murmur rolled through the room. I'll sue you, Jason hissed. You can try, I said, but I've already filed with the ethics committee. And the board has copies of everything. You're not fighting me anymore. You're fighting your own infrastructure. Jason looked at the faces around the table. Once allies, now wary. His empire didn't crack. It shifted, and he knew it. As I turned to leave, my daughter rested her head on my shoulder. Peaceful. I didn't look back because I knew this wasn't over. Not until the clause buried in his mistress's contract lit the fuse. The silence in the boardroom wasn't polite anymore. It was surgical, cold, dissecting. Every pair of eyes flicked between Jason, me, and the DNA results now sitting in the center of the table like a landmine. I had laid everything bare, clinical, chronological, undeniable. Jason's jaw was locked, his fingers tapping the edge of the table in a desperate rhythm, trying to reclaim control with sound alone. I opened the tablet I brought and played the first audio clip. His voice filled the room. "You're not a partner. You're a womb." "That's it." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Amara leaned forward. "You admit that's your voice, Jason?" she asked calmly. Jason exhaled through his nose, arms crossed. "It's taken out of context. There's more," I said. I tapped again. "I don't care if Angela talks." I paid her to disappear. "Tell my mother it's handled." This time the effect was immediate. A shareholder near the end of the table, a man in a navy suit who hadn't said a word until now, leaned back, frowning. "That's company money, Grant. Consulting payouts for non-consulting services? Fraud, if it's true." Jason looked at me like he could burn holes through my skin. "You're going to destroy my name," he muttered. "No," I said softly. "You already did? I'm just showing them where the fire started." Amara passed the DNA file to legal counsel. "These results are from a certified third-party lab. Chain of custody confirmed. No discrepancies." Jason turned toward her. "Amara, don't do this." "You know what's at stake." "I do," she said. "Integrity, which you lost the second you started hiding. Children and signing off hush money like expense. Reports." The room shifted again. Mutters. Side eyes. Realignment. I knew the board wasn't a family, it was a battlefield. And I just changed the terrain. Jason stood. "She's manipulating this entire room. You people are going to take the word of a hormonal woman and a baby?" A pause, then Amara's voice, flat and final. "We're not taking her word. We're taking yours. On tape, in writing, and in your own baby's blood." Jason froze. Behind me, my daughter stirred softly. I rocked her gently, lips brushing her forehead. "Shh," I whispered. "Daddy just became replaceable." The words weren't for the room, they were for her, because she deserved to know that no amount of money, legacy, or ego could erase her existence or mine. I turned toward the door, but before I reached it, one of the shareholders spoke. "Mrs. Grant, if you have more." "We want it." I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because what I had next would burn what was left of Jason's armor, and it was written in the clause he forgot to read. By the time I returned to my seat at the edge of the boardroom, the temperature in the room had dropped. Jason was still standing, arms crossed tightly, face flushed, not with anger anymore, but fear. Amara slid the HR packet across the table toward the general counsel. A thick document stamped confidential, with Jason's initials on every policy revision page. "This is the version of the employee handbook implemented 2 years ago," she said. "Approved and signed by Jason Grant himself. Page 34, non-fraternization clause." The legal rep flipped quickly, stopping halfway through the document. I watched Jason's throat bob as he swallowed. The counsel read aloud. "Any member of leadership engaging in undisclosed romantic or sexual relations with an employee is subject to immediate internal review, dismissal, and full forfeiture of any equity tied to performance metrics earned during the relationship period." Jason opened his mouth to protest, but Amara raised a hand. "You wrote this clause," she said. "You insisted it be ironclad after the PR fallout at Riverton Biotech. You even joked it would be the anti-mistress policy." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Angela Rivera's employment dates were already up on the screen. The audit team had moved fast. She worked directly under Jason, both professionally and otherwise, for 14 months. Her contract had been terminated under voluntary separation, but the payout flagged by accounting told a different story. Evelyn suddenly stood. "We don't need to escalate this into scandal," she said, smoothing her coat like that could fix anything. "This is a family matter. We can resolve it internally." Amara didn't even look at her. "This is corporate fraud, Mrs. Grant, and you, as a sitting trust advisor, knowingly approved the hush payment." "I acted in the company's interest," Evelyn snapped. "We were protecting the shareholders." A voice from the back of the room interrupted. It was one of the private investors. "Old money, older morals. You were protecting your son. And you were sloppy." Evelyn sat back, down. Jason's hands had gone limp at his sides. They weren't looking at him as a CEO anymore. They were looking at him as a liability. I reached into my folder one last time and slid over a printed email. A message from Jason to HR dated months before Angela's departure, instructing them to make the separation clean and quiet. It was over. Amara leaned back, folding her arms. Motion to initiate internal proceedings to suspend Jason Grant as CEO pending legal review. No one objected. Jason didn't even speak. As I stood, I caught his eyes one last time. He looked at me like he wanted to say something, but what was left to say? I picked up my daughter, whispered something only she could hear, and walked out, past the glass walls, the trembling legacy, and the mother who taught him how to hide everything. But even she couldn't hide what came next. The boardroom vote came down like a gavel. 7 in favor, 1 abstained, none opposed. Jason Grant, tech visionary, media darling, legacy son, was officially suspended from the company he built on manipulation and mirrors. He didn't argue, didn't shout, just sat there hollow like the weight of his own creation had finally crushed him from the inside. He glanced toward Evelyn, expecting rescue, but she stayed seated, spine straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. "I can't defend this," she said, her voice clipped and distant. "The name Grant means something. It always has, and I won't let it rot because of your impulses." Jason blinked at her like a child trying to recognize a stranger. "You're my mother," he said softly. "No," she replied. "I'm the steward of this family's future, and you've proven you can't be trusted with it." That was the last time she looked at him. The room emptied quickly after that, advisors murmuring, legal counsel collecting folders, shareholders already on their phones crafting statements. The empire had cracked. No explosion, just collapse. I didn't linger. I stood, my daughter still nestled against me, her breath soft against my collarbone. My heels clicked against the tile as I walked past Jason, who hadn't moved from his chair. He didn't raise his head, didn't ask for a second chance, and that, more than anything, told me it was finally over. At the glass exit, I paused just long enough to hand the board secretary a sealed envelope. It contained a custody petition, full physical custody, supervised visitation, full financial support. Attached, a spreadsheet of medical costs, prenatal records, the NDA copies, and a letter from my attorney. It wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. I stepped outside into the cool air. The sun had begun to lower, casting long shadows across the plaza. My breath fogged slightly as I exhaled. I didn't feel victorious, I didn't feel vengeful, I felt oxygen. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I could breathe without waiting for the crash of his anger. Without decoding every silence, without managing the weight of his moods. I looked down at my daughter. Her tiny fists balled against her blanket, her mouth twitching slightly in sleep. "You're safe now," I whispered. My phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer. Petition filed. Court date incoming. I didn't smile, but I nodded, because this wasn't the end. It was just the threshold. Behind me was noise. Empire and rot. Ahead of me, custody battles, headlines, maybe more silence from him. But none of it mattered anymore. Because I hadn't come for justice. I had come to survive. And I had. I crossed the street, disappearing into the city crowd, one hand on the stroller handle, the other holding the quiet strength I thought he had broken. He thought love was control. He finally lost something real, and he still didn't know what it was. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and spread the word, and tell us where you're watching from. The ballroom at the Pacific Venture Summit was polished to perfection, marble floors reflecting crystal chandeliers, rows of white leather chairs filled with investors, founders, and media. Jason stood near the side wall, hands in pockets, wearing a suit that fit but no longer felt like armor. His name wasn't on the program. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't even attending on record. Just a face in the crowd. Months had passed since the boardroom fallout. His removal had made headlines for a week. Evelyn had spun the story as a generational transfer of power. The press eventually moved on, but the industry hadn't forgotten. His invitations dwindled. The funding dried up. He became a cautionary tale in closed-door meetings. And now here he was, watching the very woman he once called just a womb take the stage with applause so loud it felt like thunder under his ribs. Layla stood beneath the summit spotlight, poised, polished, and utterly calm. She wore a cream blazer and black heels, her hair tied back, her voice clear and confident as she addressed the crowd of tech elites. "My name is Layla Grant," she began. Formerly Layla Warren. Formerly silent. There was a ripple of knowing laughter. She smiled gently. For years I believed silence was safety, that disappearing behind someone else's ambition was noble, but I was wrong. Silence doesn't protect women. It buries them. She glanced across the audience. Jason held his breath. I'm here as a founder, yes. But more than that, I'm here as a woman who rebuilt her life while holding a child in one hand and her own name in the other. Thunderous applause. The kind Jason used to command. The kind he once assumed would always belong to him. She continued with quiet conviction, outlining her new legal tech startup, one designed to protect women in high-risk domestic and corporate environments. The platform used AI to help survivors catalog abuse, build legal cases, and seek safe exits. It had already secured $8 million in seed funding and was backed by 3 firms Jason once courted. She didn't mention him once, not by name, not by history, but every word she spoke was a mirror held to his past. At the far back of the ballroom, a nanny sat quietly with a baby wrapped in a navy blue coat. The child clapped her hands when the audience did, oblivious to the war she had been born into. Jason's eyes locked on her. She had his eyes, his chin, his mother's exact scowl when she furrowed her brow, and yet, she was entirely Layla's. The nanny rocked her gently. The baby laughed, soft, high-pitched, without burden. Jason stepped forward a half pace, then stopped. He thought about approaching, just to say hello, just to ask something, anything, but he knew it wouldn't matter. He had forfeited his place. When the panel ended, the room erupted in cheers. Layla nodded once in gratitude, stepped down from the stage, and disappeared through a side corridor flanked by peers and press. She never turned toward the back row, never looked his way. Jason remained standing long after the ballroom, emptied, and the baby in the navy coat was carried away, free, unaware, and already so far out of reach.